So can we thank Dave one more time for leading us in worship today? You know, he plays the piano pretty purty, doesn't he? I mean, he does a great job. It's always good to have him, always glad to have him leading us in worship this morning. So a little less than 2 years ago now, my wife and I put our home in San Antonio on the market because I had recently received and accepted an offer to come and be one of the pastors here at Zion Wahlberg. And if you've ever had to sell your home before, then you know that it's kind of an exhausting, a stressful, and really kind of a harrowing experience. Because you never realize how much there is to do when you move, and you never realize how much you have to do when you sell your house. First thing you got to do is you actually got to clean the stinking thing, because people are going to be like, looking at it. And so you got to clean it, get rid of a bunch of stuff, then you got to stage it, and then a professional photographer comes in, and they take pictures of it, and they put those on the internet so that people can look at it. And then you're looking for a buyer, so you got all these people coming through your house, and then when you finally get a buyer, you go under contract on your house, and once you go under contract on your house, that's kind of a stressful experience too. Because usually when you first go under contract on your house, there's like this 5 to 10 day period that they call an option period, where basically the buyer can think about whether or not they really want to buy your house, and if they want to, over that 5 to 10 day period, they can back out of the contract. And one of the things that a buyer will do during an option period is they will order an inspection of your house. And this is where a professional inspector comes in, basically gives your house a once-over just to make sure that everything is okay and nothing is majorly wrong with the house. And so when we were selling our house, we get this buyer, we go under contract, we go into the option period, and our buyer orders this inspection. And so one day the inspector shows up at our door, and he starts kind of poking around our house to make sure everything's good. And most of the stuff that he found was just kind of normal run-of-the-mill stuff. There was a little bit of rot around an exterior door jamb here because a little bit of water got in there. And then there was a missing GFCI outlet over there because, the house was built like 20 years ago and they didn't even have those 20 years ago. But then he started really kind of focusing on the back end of our house. Now, our house in San Antonio, when we moved into it, on the back of the house, there was this bonus room that was added by some buyers before us, by some people who lived there before us. It was not original to the house. They added it on a little bit later, and he was kind of obsessed with the bonus room. And finally, after looking around, he comes to me, and he has a question for me. And he says to me, Zach, have you noticed that there seems to be something wrong with the foundation in the bonus room? And immediately I went, uh-oh. Because there was, it turns out, a little crack in that foundation. And even a little crack can be a big deal. There was a crack between the foundation of the original house and the foundation of the bonus room that was added a little bit later. And let me tell you, that little crack did wind up costing me big bucks. Because when you have a broken foundation, well, that's not good. So this summer at Zion, we're walking through and working through a book of the Bible. We're walking through and working through the second book of the Bible, which is the book of Exodus. And today, as we continue our trek through this book, we come to what is perhaps the most famous moment in the book of Exodus when God gives to the people of Israel, to the nation of Israel, the 10 Commandments. Now, here's the thing. Even if you don't know anything about the Bible, my guess is you've heard of the 10 Commandments before. In fact, raise your hand if you've heard of these 10 Commandments before. And here's the thing, you don't need to be a Bible scholar to know about the 10 Commandments, because in a lot of ways, the 10 Commandments are not just biblical, they form the foundation, morally, ethically, and legally, for all of Western society. Let's say you go to Washington, D.C., and you walk up the east side of the Supreme Court. You're going to see some carvings above you. They look like this. And these are carvings of famous and great lawmakers and legislators. But in the middle of them all, and bigger than all the rest of them, is this guy with 2 stone tablets. I'm going to give you a little Sunday school quiz. What are those 2 stone tablets? They are the 10 Commandments. You got it. Okay, now for extra credit, who's the guy holding the 10 Commandments? That is Moses. He was the leader of Israel. At the time, the nation of Israel got the 10 Commandments because this is how vaunted they are. They're central to our life in Western society. They form the foundation for so much of our culture. In fact, Theodore Roosevelt, a few years after he left the White House, he wrote the preface to the first ever Boy Scout manual. And in the Boy Scout manual, he wrote a letter to boys on how to become good men. And one of the pieces of advice that he gave in this preface to the Boy Scout manual was this: no man can ever be a good citizen unless he so acts as to show that he actually uses the 10 Commandments. Here's what Roosevelt is saying. The 10 Commandments are not just kind of like the foundation of Western society. They're meant to be a foundation for you and me personally. And so again, just by a show of hands, raise your hand if you would say the 10 Commandments are kind of foundational to your life. Anybody kind of see the 10 Commandments as foundational to your life? Okay, because they're so foundational, here's what I want to do. I want to do a little 10 Commandments review, because here's the funny thing about the 10 Commandments. We all say they're foundational to our life, and yet sometimes if we're asked to name the 10 Commandments, we can't name all 10 of them, and we go, well, 7 out of 10, 6 out of 10, 5 out of 10, that's not so bad, right? And so we're going to do a little 10 Commandments review just in case we've forgotten a few. You guys ready? All right, first commandment. Here we go. Exodus 20, verse 3. God is speaking to the people of Israel. He's also speaking to you and to me. And here's the very first commandment he gives in Exodus 20, verse 3. He says, you shall have no other gods before me. Now, this is a commandment that is against idolatry. And here's what idolatry is. Let me define it for you. Idolatry is when you take something that is not God and you put it before God. Idolatry is when you take something that is not God and you make it more important than God. And here's the key. Anything can be idolatry. In fact, as God kind of expounds on the first commandment, this is the way he explains it. He says, don't make for yourself an image. In other words, don't set your sights and your hearts on anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. And so let's say that you're looking to heaven above, and there's another faith system that claims to have all sorts of wisdom from on high. If you trade the true faith system for that faith system, you know what that is? That's idolatry, because you're taking something that is not divine and you're treating it like it is divine. Or let's just take the earth beneath, the earth that we all live on and live in. If you get so tied up in the things of this world, if you're always worried about your finances, always worried about your job, always worried about your hopes and your dreams, if you're always worried about your spouse or always worried about your kids, and if you worry more than you worship, you know what that is? That's idolatry. Because you're taking something that, as important as it may be, it's still not God, and you're focusing on that more than you are on God. Or let's take the waters below. Be honest, would anybody rather be fishing right now on the waters below than be in church? You could be skating right there on the edge of idolatry. Now, I should probably ask at this point with the first commandment, has anybody in here ever struggled with idolatry before? I mean, have you ever taken something that is not God and maybe put it before God? Have you ever worried more about things that are earthly than worship the God who is heavenly? Because if that's something that you've done, then here's what you've done. You've broken the first commandment. And here's what's so damaging and devastating about that. You've actually broken something that we all just agreed is like the foundation of our lives. And here's the problem. A broken foundation? Trust me, I learned this. That's not good. All right, second commandment, Exodus 20, verse 7. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Now, when I was growing up, I learned this commandment as a prohibition against saying things like my God, right? Using God's name in a way that's kind of flippant. But it actually is a lot broader and a lot deeper than that. Because this commandment is a prohibition against using God's name in any way that kind of furthers your own selfish ambitions and desires. It's a prohibition against using God's name in a way that kind of manipulates things or manipulates other people. And so, for example, if there's a politician who says something like, I just feel like God is calling me to run for office, that might be true, but the politician probably wants to double check that, because if you're just invoking God's name to win an office, you're not just using God's name, you're misusing God's name. Or how about this one? A young man says to a young woman, I just feel like God has brought us together. We should be together forever. That might be true, but he probably really wants to be careful with that, because if he's just using God's name to get the girl, he's not just using God's name, he's misusing God's name. So I should probably ask you again, you ever done something like this? Where you kind of invoke God's name to make yourself look a little extra holy or a little extra righteous. You use God's name in a way that makes you look good and somebody else look bad, and you're not just using God's name, you're misusing God's name. Anybody ever done that before? Because if you have, you've broken this commandment. And here's the real problem. You've broken something that we just all agreed is like the foundation of our lives. And take it from me. A broken foundation. That's not good. Let's keep going. Third commandment. Exodus 20, verse 8, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Old Testament written in Hebrew. This word Sabbath is actually from a Hebrew word that means stop. And so this commandment is actually also an invitation to simply stop, to take a break, to rest, to not go 90 miles an hour all the time. How you doing on this? You ever have a calendar that is not just jam-packed but overpacked, where you schedule 5 appointments at once and you go, how am I going to make it through all of this? How long is your to-do list? Is it over a mile long? Do you live your life fueled by Red Bull and Mountain Dew? If you do, then you may be struggling to keep this commandment. You may be breaking this commandment. And here's the problem with breaking this commandment. You're breaking something that we kind of agree is like the foundation of our lives. And take it from me, a broken foundation, that's not good. Keep going, Exodus 20, verse 12, the fourth commandment. Honor your father and your mother. A little bit more Hebrew here for you. The Hebrew word behind this word honor is the word kaved, which is a Hebrew word that means heavy. We actually talked about this a few weeks ago. This is actually an invitation to kids, especially to teenagers, okay? So teens, listen up. Being an adult can be kaved. Being an adult can be heavy because you have a lot of heavy and hard decisions you need to make. You have a lot of heavy and hard shots that you need to call. And the invitation here is to let your parents make those decisions and then follow those decisions. You don't have to make all the decisions yourself, because if you make them, you probably don't have enough experience and wisdom, and you're probably just going to mess them up. So follow your parents' lead. That's what it means to honor them. Now, even if you're not a teenager anymore, think back to when you were a teenager. You always followed your parents' lead, right? You never had your parents make one decision and then you went over here and said, well, that's not the decision I'm going to make, and that never got you into trouble, right? Because if you tried to call your own shots and make your own decisions, and if those shots and decisions got you into trouble, you know what you just did? You just broke this commandment. You just broke something that we will say is the foundation of our lives. And take it from me, a broken foundation. That's not good. Aren't you glad you came to church this morning? Don't worry, only 6 more to go, okay? I mean, how much more can we mess this up? All right, so let's keep going here. 5th commandment, Exodus 20, verse 13. You shall not murder. Now, of course, this is a prohibition against doing something that'll get you 20 to life, but it's more than that, okay? This is not just a prohibition against doing someone harm. This is a prohibition against even wishing someone harm. In fact, I was thinking about this. It's so interesting the way that we'll talk about our anger. We'll say things like, wow, she was really shooting daggers at him. Or, whoa, He gave her the look of death. We actually talk about our anger in terms of the fifth commandment because we all know that the fifth commandment isn't just about what you do. It's also about how you feel towards someone else. And even if you wish them harm, even if you wish them ill, you have broken this commandment. So, have you ever had nasty thoughts about somebody else? Because if you have, you've broken this commandment. You've broken something that we all say is kind of like the foundation of our lives. And take it from me, a broken foundation. That's not good. Sixth commandment, Exodus 20, verse 14, you shall not commit adultery. Now again, this is like a physical prohibition. Don't sleep with someone who's not your spouse. But it goes deeper than that. It's more than that. It doesn't just involve what you do. It does involve how you feel. You ever experience feelings of lust? You ever look at someone not as a person, but as an object? And you let your eyes linger on them just a little too long? You have that one fantasy that you never want to tell anybody about because if anybody ever found out about it, it would be incredibly embarrassing to you. You struggle with anything like that? Because if you do, then you've broken this commandment too. You've broken something that we kind of agree is, foundational to our lives. And take it from me, a broken foundation, that's not good. Now, the last four commandments come as couplets. All right, the seventh and eighth commandments, they go together. And the ninth and 10th commandments, they go together too, and so we're going to kind of take them together. So here are the seventh and eighth commandments. Exodus 20, verse 15, here's the seventh commandment. You shall not steal. And then verse 16, the eighth commandment, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. Now here's the reason they go together. They both have to do with taking something from your neighbor. The seventh commandment is a prohibition against taking stuff from your neighbor. That's what it means not to steal. So that leaf blower that you borrowed and then you still have 8 months later because you forgot to bring it back, that's breaking this commandment. But then the eighth commandment is a prohibition not against taking your neighbor's stuff, but against taking your neighbor's reputation. Because that's what you do when you say false things about your neighbor, when you lie about your neighbor, when you talk bad about your neighbor, you ruin his reputation or her reputation in front of all of your friends. And in fact, just to drill down on this a little bit more, one more bit of Hebrew here for you. The Hebrew word behind this word false is the word shakur, which doesn't just mean false. It does include something that's false, but it means anything that is injurious. Here's the idea. Even if it's true, sometimes you still shouldn't say it if it's going to injure their reputation. This commandment is the commandment that your mama gave you when she said, if you don't have anything nice to say, what don't you do? You don't say anything at all. So, I should ask you, have you ever borrowed something, forgotten to give it back? You ever gossiped about somebody, talked smack about somebody? Because if you have, then you've broken these two commandments too. You've broken something that we kind of agree is, the foundation of our lives, and take it from me. A broken foundation. That's not good. All right, 9th and 10th commandments, they come as a couplet too. They're two commandments about one thing. Exodus 20, verse 17, here's the 9th commandment, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. And then here's the 10th commandment, you shall not covet your neighbor's spouse, his wife, his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. Here's the idea. The 9th commandment is all about not coveting your neighbor's stuff, and the 10th commandment is about not coveting your neighbor's relationships, like don't covet their spouse. Now here's what coveting is. It's a deep desire for something that doesn't rightly belong to you. A pretty good synonym for coveting is jealousy. Now, here's the way coveting often comes out in our lives. Coveting often comes out as bitterness. You often know that you're coveting something when you're bitter towards someone. You got your neighbor who drives home in the brand new truck or the brand new car, and you are driving a 1998 Nissan Sentra that you got to put oil into every few miles and leaves a big black spot under it on your driveway. And you look at your neighbor with that brand new car that you just know cost at least $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, and you go, huh. I wonder if he knows how much value that car lost when he drove it off the lot. I mean, depreciation is terrible these days. And wasting money like that. I mean, come on, all you really need is something to get you from point A to point B. Now, that's what you say. What you're really thinking is, if he wanted to give me that for free, I'd gladly take it, right? But we don't say that part out loud. Our coveting comes out as bitterness. You ever been bitter at someone because of something that they had that you really kind of sort of wanted? Because if you have, then you've broken these 2 commandments too. You've broken something that a lot of people agree is, kind of the foundation of our lives. And a broken foundation, take it from me, that's not good. Those are the 10 commandments. There's the review. So, how'd you do? Anybody score 100? Follow all the 10 commandments all the time? Yeah, okay, here. Let's do it like this. Anybody score 0? You've broken all the 10 commandments at least once in your life. I'll go first. I've been there too. And this actually leads us to the big problem with the 10 commandments. We talk about them as the foundation of our lives. But a broken foundation is not good. And so here's the question, what do you do? How do you fix the foundation when you break it? Now, there's an answer to that question. How do you fix the foundation when you break it? And I'm going to warn you before I give you the answer that it's a very unsettling answer, but it's also a very important answer. The answer to the question, how do you fix the foundation of the 10 commandments when you break them, is this: you don't. You don't. In fact, I'm going to push even harder. And I'm going to say, not only do you not fix them, you shouldn't even try. And here's why. The 10 Commandments are good. They're very good. I would encourage you to follow them, live by them, do them to the best of your ability. The 10 Commandments are good. But here's the deal. They're not a good foundation. Let me explain. When a foundation breaks, everything that is built on that foundation, you know what begins to happen to it? It begins to break down. So I'll be honest. When the inspector came and told me I had a foundation problem, I kind of sort of maybe suspected it a little bit. Because all sorts of weird stuff started happening in my house. The little tape that held together the drywall seams, that began to come off, and some of the nails began to come out of the wall, and there was this one door in the back of the house in the bonus room that I couldn't open and close. The foundation was breaking, and so everything that was built on that foundation began to break down. And what is true of houses is true of you, too. When you build your life on the 10 Commandments, once you break them, you yourself will begin to break down. And so if you're that type A personality and you're overscheduling yourself and you're going 90 miles an hour and you break the 3rd commandment, you never stop, you never take a rest, you never take a break, eventually that foundation that you break will break you. Because you'll burn out. and you'll hit the wall. Or the sixth commandment. If you don't honor your marriage vows and you commit adultery, even if it's not physically, even if it's by looking pictures you shouldn't be looking at, eventually when your spouse finds out, that's going to be big trouble for you, because you've just broken the foundation of the sixth commandment. And when you break that foundation, that's going to break you, and it might just break up your marriage if you're not careful. Or the first commandment. If God is just kind of an afterthought in your life, if you call out to God when you have time, or when you're in trouble, and when you worship God when you only have time, eventually that commandment that you break is going to break you, because it's going to empty your soul and make your spirit sick. And the problem is we all break these commandments all the time. Which means that eventually, if we build our whole lives on these commandments are going to break us, which is why we can't just patch up the commandments. What we really need is a different foundation. What we really need is a better foundation. What we really need is a strong foundation that will not break. There's this fascinating scene in the Gospel of John chapter 19. Jesus is on the cross, and crucified on either side of Jesus are these two criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And John is there for this whole thing. He's an eyewitness to it all. And he writes about his experience in John 19, verse 32. There's this one moment that kind of captures his attention when the Roman soldiers who are standing guard over these executions, they come and they break the legs of one of the men who had been crucified with Jesus. And then they went around to the other side of Jesus, and they broke the legs of the other man too. Now here's the reason they would do this. Crucifixion was a very slow way to go. And so what Roman soldiers would do to speed up the process is they would break the legs of you when you were being crucified, because then you would kind of fall over and you wouldn't be able to breathe, and you'd basically die of asphyxiation. But verse 33, they get to Jesus, and here's what they find. They find that he was already dead. So, here's what they didn't do. They didn't break him. They didn't break his legs. Now, John, who's there for all of this, knows what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, yeah, that's just a bit of coincidence. Of course they didn't break his legs. He was already dead. But John says, no. That's not just coincidence. That's divine providence. God's making a point here. When Jesus' legs don't get broken, and here's the point, about 1,000 years before this moment on this cross, there was a psalmist who wrote these words in Psalm 34, verse 20, that there's going to be this man who's going to be beaten and bloodied and bruised. But here's the one thing he's not going to be. He's not going to be broken. And in Psalm 34, verse 20, he writes, not one of his bones will be broken. And John's argument is that prophecy from that psalm was fulfilled in this man, because here's what you need to know about Jesus. Not even a cross can break him. Now, about 25 years after Jesus dies on the cross, after he's beaten and bruised and bloodied but not broken, about 25 years after Jesus dies on the cross, there's this follower of Jesus. His name is Paul, and Paul is reflecting on this moment in John 19 where Jesus is killed, but he's not broken. And this little light goes on, and he realizes what this means. because it means something profound and special and incredible about Jesus. And he writes what it means in 1 Corinthians 3, verse 11, when he says, here's what you need to know about God. God himself has laid a foundation. And by the way, when he laid this foundation, you're not going to do any better than God's foundation, so don't even try. Now, here's God's foundation. Now, if you were reading this as a first century Jew, you would expect everyone to go, oh yeah, the foundation of God is the 10 Commandments. But Paul says, no, it's Jesus Christ, because Jesus is a foundation that cannot be broken, which means that Jesus is the foundation that we all need. Here's kind of the best way I know how to explain it, okay? So when my kids were really little, I used to take them to a place called the Doozeum. It's a museum that is designed for kids. And it was a lot of fun. In fact, Hope and Hayden loved it when they were little kids. I brought a couple of pictures. They would go to these different exhibits. Hope's favorite exhibit was the veterinarian exhibit, because she wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. And so there she is with the stuffed dog and the stuffed cat and that really scary big-looking needle that would make me shiver if she came at that with me, right? But she loved spending time there. And then here's Hayden. His favorite exhibit was the automotive exhibit, which means his first job is going to be a discount tire, rotating and balancing tires, because, there he is. Now, one of the reasons that me and Melody love to take Hope and Hayden to the Doozeum is it got them out of the house. It got them out of our house. And you may know this, or you may remember this if you have little kids, or if you had little kids. Little kids are incredibly destructive. Have you guys just noticed this before? Like, they color on walls and they climb on furniture. They tear it all up. They break your dishes. They break their own toys. They break everything. In fact, Melody and I always used to say, you know what? This is why we can't have nice things, because they break everything, right? And one of the reasons that we love to take them to the Doozeum is because the Doozeum was built from the ground up. It was built from the foundation up with little kids in mind. Which means it was built to be like indestructible. They could pull things, twist things, throw things, shake things, hit things, and it was all fine. Because it was built with them in mind. Let me tell you something. When Jesus came, he built a mission and a ministry from the ground up, from the foundation up, with sinners in mind. And so he built his mission and ministry in such a way that the foundation of that mission and ministry would be indestructible. Which is why he didn't build it on commands, he built it on, grace. And he built it on mercy. He built it on forgiveness. He built it on a promise that when sinners like you and like me break something as precious, as marvelous, and as wonderful as the 10 Commandments, and we all do, he built it on a promise that when sinners like you and like me do all sorts of things we shouldn't be doing, he would save us instead of break us. Which is why we're all really, at the end of it all, presented with a choice. And here's the choice. We all got to decide on what are we going to build our lives. What's your foundation gonna be? It is so tempting and so enticing and so alluring to try to build your lives on the Ten Commandments, isn't it? I mean, it really kind of is. Because after all, if you build your lives on the Ten Commandments, if you do good, you feel good. And even better, if you do good, you feel better than other people who don't do as good, which means that you get to be a little bit superior spiritually to them. And that always feels good, doesn't it? But there's a shadow side. There's a shadow side to living that way. There's a shadow side to building your life that way. Eventually, you're going to do bad. And then you're going to feel bad. Eventually, those commandments that you break are going to break you. And so here's the choice. Build your life on the commandments and take a risk. With the commandments you break, that foundation that you break will break you, or build your life on Jesus, who's indestructible. If a cross can't break him, if death can't break him, your sin can't break him. And when you build your life on him, he will save you. So, choose your foundation wisely. Let's stand and pray. Heavenly Father, it is so tempting to want to build our lives on how good we can be and how successful we can be, how righteous we can act. May we never forget the danger in that. May we build our lives on Jesus. It's in his name that we pray. Amen.